Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer here with Dylan Tovitz. Dylan, Vanderbilt football keeps rolling, 4-0 for the first time since 2008. And I'm going to give you a little history quiz here. I don't know if you saw the tweet. Vanderbilt scores 70 points for the first time since 1918. Dylan, I don't know if you read the tweet. Can we tell the people about Vanderbilt's quarterback situation in 1918 versus now, where I think it's a little bit steadier?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I did briefly read the tweet. I know that, they won the game 76 nothing over Tennessee, actually. So there's that. I don't know, Joey. Why don't you tell us about the quarterback situation that you seem so briefed on here?
You know what's funny is I made the tweet about the quarterback situation and I didn't even really read the text blurb that I posted. I just read it and was like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So Vanderbilt didn't have it was I guess a revolving door at quarterback, kind of like Vandy had in 23 with Swan, Seals, and Taylor. A little bit different though. Uh, so the first quarterback they had, um, I guess, died in combat in would that have been World War I, Dylan?
Yeah.
And then the second one, um, I guess the second one was the interim coach who uh, had to play quarterback because the first quarterback passed away, and he eventually fell ill with the Spanish flu himself. So it's a very different quarterback situation
Just
than Vanderbilt has now. Just a little bit. All that to say, Vanderbilt still finding ways to rewrite program history here. A heck of a week against Georgia State, and we'll talk a little bit about that game, but I think mostly we'll go more state of the program this week. But Dylan, before we get to that, tell me about what you saw on Saturday. Obviously, a sellout crowd, and Vanderbilt puts up 70 points. What do you think that says about them?
Yeah, I mean there were a lot of good things to come out of Saturday. I think this is a team, and we talked about this last week, but this is a Georgia State team that they absolutely should have beaten, and they should have beaten by, several scores. They weren't necessarily a team that Vanderbilt, quote unquote, should have put on 70 points on. They're not, this isn't even like an Alcorn State or a Charleston Southern. Like Georgia State is a solid program. And especially on the offensive side of the ball, it was complete domination from the second, the ball was kicked off, and it was I think we're starting to realize now that like this is an offense that is not only like belongs in the SEC but is like at the towards the top of the SEC in terms of production, at least so far. They're doing everything that you could possibly want them to be doing against the better teams, the better defenses, against, the maybe weaker defenses like Georgia State. But on the offensive side of the ball, it just looks very easy, which is something that I think fans, and maybe not Vanderbilt fans, but a lot of fans kind of fall into a trap of seeing offense that looks easy and just taking it for granted. And I could tell you I'm a Giants fan, and I will never take that for granted because the New York Giants haven't had good offense in years. But to get back to the point, the offense just, and it was Pavia and it was the offensive line, and it just looked really easy. And frankly, it has looked really easy in all four games so far. A lot of good things on the offense, and the defense, I thought there were a lot of good things as well. Obviously, maybe they were a little, shakier on that side of the ball. I think Georgia State moved the ball a bit, but Georgia State also has a pretty good offense. I thought they did a decent job against Ted Hurst. There were a couple situations where they were given really good field position that, to start the second half when Clarkley went for it on 4th and 1. But there was a lot of good on the defense as well. I thought a few things I noticed. I thought Brian Longwell played a really good game. He was kind of flying all over the field. He, to me, stood out more in the linebacker core than anyone else. I thought we saw a lot of Dante Carter in the game,
Mhm.
more than I think we had in the past. And I don't know if you have the snap counts, but just from the eye
Mhm.
test, I think it was heavy Dante Carter and maybe a little less Marlon Sewell.
Look, he played 28 and Marlon Sewell played 35. But I mean, relative to what we've
Yeah.
seen previously, it's
Right.
more
That's
Dante
less of a
Carter.
that's less of a starter backup than and more of a kind of safety by committee situation. But I
Mhm.
thought the defense held up well. We said that they were probably going to sit back in a little more of a conservative approach against Georgia State, which I think they did, and they did well. They weren't really beat down the field at all. There were no, complete lapses or miscommunications, and Georgia State moved the ball okay, but the run defense was strong, and they certainly once Vanderbilt's offense was up putting up 42 points and a half. It was about as good as you could expect it to be. So I don't know if you have any additional takeaways on top of that. That was kind of what I saw in the game, but definitely a lot of good. And obviously, also I want to mention the special teams. Like really, Clark Lee talks about how it's three phases of the game, three operations, and they treat it like that in practice. And I thought the special teams did really well between the blocked kick and everything else, and obviously the defensive touchdown there from Jamison Curtis. So really, really strong showing on all three sides of the ball was kind of my takeaway, and obviously that showed in the score.
Yeah, Dylan, two things. First of all, obviously this is a tinted number with them scoring 70 points. They're averaging almost 50 points a game offensively. They've punted it 5 times in 4 games. I mean, what more can you ask for from the offense? And wrote about it yesterday, but again, probably my biggest takeaway is just Diego Pavia doesn't have to be Superman or the Heisman or anything like that for them to be a good offense. I've seen a lot more of him just sitting back there and kind of managing the game, distributing than I did last year. And I think you could agree, like you watched the Kentucky game last year and they scored 20 points and it feels like it took everything in Pavia to generate every single play that got them 20 points.
Yeah.
Whereas you're sitting there watching them play Georgia State and you're like, man, Blaise Berlowitz could have fired it 5 yards down the field to Trey Richardson or Eli Stowers and those guys go get 20 yards after the catch. Like he could have handed it off to Cedric Alexander for a 10-yard gain or MK Young. Well, he did hand it off to MK Young for the 60-yard run. And it's not even about Berlowitz or Pavia. It's about they're so much better on the offensive line. I think the receiver room is significantly improved, and defensively too. I don't think they got enough credit heading into Saturday for that to be their worst defensive game of the year by somewhat of a significant margin is nuts to me. 21 points, and I mean, they were still pretty good. I thought Corday Sidner got a 87 grade almost by PFF.
That
If
checks too. He played a good game, you could tell.
yeah, I thought Miles Capers played pretty well too, and they didn't think as highly of him. But I mean, he had a sack and a half, 2.5 TFLs. Like I thought they got to at least put some pressure on Georgia State's quarterbacks, and I thought did a nice job on Ted Hurst, like you mentioned. And man, they just have not got enough credit nationally for what they've done. There's been a lot of talk about, well, their offense is better and Pavia is Pavia, but man, their defense I think has really been the key that's oiled this whole thing. There's been some really bad Vanderbilt defenses over the years that have made good offenses look worse. This offense looks really good, and I think you got to give Vanderbilt's defense a lot of credit for being able to do that. But Dylan, I guess bigger than all, what we want to talk today is kind of state of the program and done it before a little bit, but just 4-0 for the first time since 2008, have a chance to be 5-0, and I think that's a realistic expectation at this point. Uh, Ranked number 18, the highest since I think 2008. They were ranked 13th once, and then every other week that year they were ranked below 18th. So, Dylan, I mean, just drastic to keep hearing these types of things, and you just think about before last year, we're watching the fall camp scrimmage and thinking, man, this team might have some problems. To see that this core has come together and done this and really has improved in year two of it all being together, I mean, it's just drastic to see kind of the season they're putting together. And even like you mentioned, their offense is one of the better offenses in the league. I think what we've had to consider with Vanderbilt football in the past is it's good for Vanderbilt in a lot of ways. I think this team is just good, and the numbers are starting to back that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think the media attention, especially the national media attention, is still very much framing Vanderbilt as like a Cinderella story and, not even in a negative way, like maybe more in a positive way, but like maybe last year was the Cinderella story. Like that's not what this is anymore. Like this is a really good football team and a team that, is building something that they can replicate year over year. And you bring up a really good point with Pavia because you think about the future of this team. And I think last year, um, it seemed like Diego Pavia was the team. And if and when he didn't come back the following year, which would be this year, like we would kind of be all over the place and you expect a regression there. And I think even going into this year, we kind of thought that like this year's team is probably going to be better than next year's team when next year's team has no Pavia, no Stowers, and all the other guys that are graduating. And I'm not to say that I'm not to say that I don't think that's the case anymore. But I think you are seeing something be built that is a lot more sustainable and is built. This is a program that is building towards like long-term sustainable success. And you see a lot of these changes. You see a lot of the way Clark Lee is coaching his team, the way they're building the depth of the roster, the way they, are changing the belief and the attitude in the program. This is something that I personally am now expecting to last for years to come. And I think I made this analogy maybe last week or the week before, but Vanderbilt baseball I think of because they have built a culture, and building a culture takes time, and really getting people to buy into that culture takes time. It's different than, you can have like a good locker room, you can have a good atmosphere. And actually, I read about, I forget who it was, but someone wrote about this, I think maybe in The Athletic, like a couple weeks ago, like how hard it is to actually build a culture and how long that takes. And you're starting to see these steps be made in Vanderbilt football. And I think fans need to take a step back and realize that and appreciate that this is a program that is not just having, a really great year and a half stretch behind a superstar quarterback that came out of nowhere and is one of the best stories in the country. And he's going to go on and do his own thing. And Vanderbilt football is going to go back to their, you know, 3-9 seasons, 2-10 seasons. Again, could that happen? Of course, but I think you're really starting to see these building blocks kind of form inside of First Bank Stadium and the McGugin Center. And I think again, like this is something that now the expectation is that this is going to last, and I think it is beginning to be built to last. And it's hard to explain, but Clark Lee has said it since the beginning of fall camp. He said the internal belief in the program is higher than it's ever been. And I think the external belief from the students, from the fans, from the Nashville community, and even from like the rest of the school and the athletics program, in terms of, you know, whoever is deciding how much money and they're going to give to Vanderbilt football, like they're starting to buy in now too, because it's hard not to watch what we've watched in the first 4 weeks and not see this as a program that is completely kind of flipped on its head. So I really think that this change that you're starting to see is going to transfer long term. But I don't know. What do you agree with that, Joey? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you said, last year I kind of thought was a miracle Cinderella story run. This year, I think I think it's different where I look at them and I think of something that's a little more sustainable. I think people get caught up in the trap too much of looking ahead, and this is not a shot at you or anything. I thought the same way about kind of what they're gonna do moving forward, and I mean, I even had a talk with somebody after the presser about what Pavia said about Berlitz and them having to address the future with a transfer portal quarterback, all of that, right? I think at some point people have got to just live in the present here and realize like man, I don't know how much longer they're going to have Tim Beck. Tim Beck is just, he's done a wonderful job this year. He was kind of in the mix for some head coaching jobs last year. For them to keep him, I think is unbelievable. And I think for them to have him next year, the odds may not be that high. And that's not based on any intel. It's just, I mean, he's just done an excellent job. And I think he'll be a hot commodity if this continues. They're not going to have Pavia next year, won't have Stowers. I think people kind of approach that with being afraid more than they approach it with thinking, man, like kind of living in the golden age here of this football program where it seems like all the stars have aligned for this to go well, where you get the lawsuit with Pavia and Stowers decides that he wants back in so he can block a little bit more and show evaluators that he can do that. I mean, what are the odds that all of these things have kind of come together for this program, Dylan? Like the whole defense comes back. They all have got a year of eligibility left. I'm sure they were intentional about getting guys with multiple years of eligibility, but also like, at what point do you hit on all these defensive transfers and somehow they've all got years of eligibility? And You're reaping the benefits of that now. They're all flying around. I mean, this is a run unlike you'll really see in college football where feels like everything has gone right in terms of how they wanted to build this thing. And I do think it is more sustainable than I initially thought it was. You see the recruits on the sideline, they're just frankly much better players than they've had on the sideline in the past for these types of games. But Dylan, I was just reflecting the other day on just how all of this has kind of progressed and maybe how the schedule has lined up for them too, where they're able to prove themselves early with two big wins. And I think they were at an advantage to do that because they've all played together before. But man, it's interesting to me just to see how I guess how all of it's flowed together for good for this program.
Yeah, it's true. And I say that it's seeing more sustainable. Like that doesn't mean that all the season's going to look like what this season looks
Yeah,
like because to your point, um, pretty much everything is in the exact right place right now. And you bring up a really good point with Tim Beck because he is like, in my opinion, one of the best offensive coordinators in college football, and he's not going to be here for much longer. And
yeah, they got lucky too. Honestly, maybe the best thing that happened to them was what happened last November, where it all kind of went to crap. That's why they kept him back.
Right. And it's the same with Jerry Kill. Like he's not even in a coordinator position. Like Kill is not a guy, whether he ends up taking a job somewhere else or not, like he's not going to be here forever. Diego obviously is not going to be here forever. You're not going to have a first round tight end. This is all like very reasonably like going to be gone by next season, especially with the coordinators. And I think you do have to realize that this is probably one of the better teams you're going to see from Vanderbilt football, even if you're thinking about it in terms of the future. I do think this culture idea is something that's building towards long term, and I think it will ultimately turn the program around. But that is a good point, and I would agree with you there that right now is about as good as you're going to get it as a Vanderbilt fan, and this team and everything that's gone the right way so far. And obviously they got to finish, but this is a team that has, I think I saw a couple stats that gave them like a 36% chance of winning 9 games right now, which would put them at least in the conversation for an at-large, bid to the college football playoff, which is a crazy that like that sounds crazy coming out of my mouth that we're not talking like are we sure we didn't move a decimal point there and it's still like 3.6%? Like that's
Right.
literally where my head goes. Um, and I think I saw something that they're like favored in all of their remaining home games, which I don't know if that's true, but like if that is true, we're gonna be like you're telling me Vanderbilt's favored against LSU. Like,
It's
we go
crazy.
on the road against South Carolina. We're 2.5 point. They're 2.5 point underdogs on the road, and they're all of a sudden ranked between Alabama and Michigan in the AP top 25. Like, it's crazy stuff. And even if with the right culture and with the right program turnaround, like that's not necessarily the outcome you'd expect, even in the 100th percentile. So, to your point there, Joey, I think everything is going right now, and it is important to kind of take a step back and realize that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think my message here is not to panic about Tim Beck or Jerry Kill leaving after the year. I think the message is enjoy this. Like, don't worry about next year at this point. Worry about, man, this team could make a run. If they go to Tuscaloosa and win, probably going to get game day for LSU. I mean, this could continue to be fun. And Clark Lee, I think, had an interesting quote on Saturday, and the quote itself wasn't all that interesting, but kind of how he framed it was. He was talking about how this team can do some really fun and special things. I mean, Dylan, I think we would agree that they already have. And Clark's talking as if they really haven't done all that many things to this point, which I think is noteworthy. This almost feels like one of those magical March Madness runs to me where team just has everything firing on all cylinders. It looks like they don't even have to be coached at times. Like they're just going out there and playing and are better than everyone, and they're getting the breaks and all their flaws are kind of being masked. This is just it's unlike anything in sports really, other than I feel like a college football playoff run or a March Madness run. And I know Vanderbilt's not there yet, and maybe they won't get to the college football playoff, but it just feels like one of those scenarios where you're watching it and you're like, man, this team they just can't lose. They just won't lose regardless. And who knows what happens the rest of the way, but that's the impression you've got in the first 4 weeks, there's probably been a total of 5 minutes through 4 games where I thought they were going to lose. And I think that says something about just kind of what they have and really how dominant they've been and just the swagger they're playing with right now.
Yeah, it's true. And I think the difference between like a college football season and a March Madness run is like you can I think March Madness runs you get a lot more of that Cinderella feel where things just like, you can't explain it and things are just going right. Like I wouldn't necessarily like I think you can explain this. I think Vanderbilt
Mhm.
has the pieces and it has the roster and it's believed in it since the very beginning before they started anything. So I feel like we might compare it to a March Madness run. Like they're thinking of it as as you mentioned, they're like we haven't even done anything yet kind of thing. And that's
Mhm.
absolutely the right mentality to have. And looking ahead on this schedule, you have Utah State and you have Alabama, which all of a sudden seems like a lot more of a winnable game. Obviously, I wouldn't expect them to be favored in that or anything, especially considering it's in Tuscaloosa. But like every game on their schedule is now a game. Like it's a
Mhm.
game and it's, you know, expected to be pretty close. And I think you bring up the right point there that this is like kind of everything is going right in fear of repeating myself again because I feel like I'm kind
Mhm.
of a broken record a little bit right now, but you do have to appreciate that because um it's very rare that a team like this that comes out of a program that's had the history of Vanderbilt just kind of appears out of nowhere and has everything in the exact right spot like they do currently. And I do, as I said earlier, I do believe that a run like this, where from the Virginia Tech last year to Alabama to the bowl game to everything that's happened so far this year, like that's something that can cultivate like a complete change in the future of the program. Which
Mhm.
again, I know you're trying to refrain from talking about the future of the program,
Mhm.
but I think it's important because I
Yeah.
think it's different than one March Madness run is not going to necessarily completely change a program. I think
Mhm.
an entire college football season, especially in the SEC, and honestly more than a season if you go back to last year, that can like become a building block for the future of a program. And it's really important to note that and to realize that things might change and things are going to change in terms of personnel and at some point in terms of coaching. Um, but a run like this, especially if they go to the places they want to go this year, will put Vanderbilt football like back on the map. Or honestly, you can even say on the map for the first time, at least the first time I can remember in these serious conversations. And it's not just there was a feel last year when they got ranked for the first time that like the sky was falling.
Mhm.
And I think what you're seeing now is something that can lend itself to getting pretty used to seeing a number next to Vanderbilt's name, kind of in on the score bug each week, and that's a pretty cool thing. And again, we want to stay a little bit away from like what is this going to look like in 6 years because that kind of defeats the entire purpose. But it's important to note, and obviously, right now they're set up pretty well going forward.
Yeah, and even more so if Clarkley decides to stay, which I don't have any indication that he wouldn't right now, even if a bigger job opened. I think, has turned down more than people have realized over the years, and I think
That's an
that's a big
interesting
deal.
question. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's an interesting question with Clark for sure.
yeah, and well, that's a whole nother topic for a whole
Yeah,
nother day.
we could do a whole
Uh,
podcast on that.
but like to your point about the March Madness run, St. Peter's went 14 and 18 the year after they beat Kentucky, so I don't imagine that being the case for this Vanderbilt team. And you're right, I think it's a lot different. Dylan, for this to keep going though, got to be Utah State. And I think Utah State's pretty significantly better than Georgia State. Obviously, only lost to A&M by 20 and only being a loose term there, but I think they can really score it. Their quarterback has 8 touchdowns and almost 1,000 yards and just one interception to this point. Again, though, it's not a talent issue at this point for Vanderbilt. It's can Vanderbilt come in and be dialed in and ready to go? That's going to win you this game. And Dylan, another thing too that I think reflects the state of the program, and we can kind of take this in the lens of the Utah State game if you want. I just think they're more mature at this point, and I have a lot more faith that they're not going to come out and not be ready to play. I think that's a big deal in itself, and we'll see on Saturday. But no part of me thinks that they're going to lose this game, and I think that's a huge step even from last year as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned it, but Utah State, I think they're the best non-conference opponent Vanderbilt will have all season or has had all season. I saw a
Imagine
rating.
saying that before the season.
Yeah, it's crazy actually. But I uh I saw a rating that they have the, I think, best offense in terms of whatever it is, offensive rating that Vanderbilt has faced so far. So that includes South Carolina and, Virginia Tech. The defense is less strong, I think, than their offense, but this is definitely a solid team. And they can't take it for granted at the moment, in terms of it's going to be a win. Obviously, everything we've talked about in the first 20 minutes of this podcast can just completely evaporate if they lose to Utah State this week, which I'm not saying I think would happen, or I think even there's that much more than a minute possibility of that happening. But you still do have to go out there and play strong football, and I think it'll also be a pretty good test for the defense. You want to avoid, if this is another game, the offense will I can almost guarantee you do pretty well against Utah State, and score enough points to win the game. If this is a game where the defense is letting up, 30 points, even if the offense scores more, like that might raise some red flags. I think again, they let up 21 to Georgia State. That's a little misleading, I think, because a lot of it was later on and with bad field position. But it's definitely an important game to watch, and it's also an important game to continue to build that momentum, continue to build the vibes inside the building going into Alabama, and also continue to kind of pull in that fan base, the students. And I think it's remarkable. We should probably talk about this for a minute. Um, I was expecting a worse turnout than showed up, from the fans for sure. I think this was a game that did sell out, but it sold out pretty late, and I thought that the fan presence was like much better than it was even week one against Charleston Southern, which was pretty much a sellout. And I was not expecting that. I think the lightning delay situation caused a little bit of a lag where everybody was trying to get into the stadium at the same time. But like halfway through the first quarter, like I looked up and on the side of the student section and all the rest of the fans on that side, and like it was like it looked like a sellout. It looked like
Mm.
an SEC, full pack stands. And I think week one we saw it a little bit, but I felt like we were maybe a little. We talked about how we were a little not disappointed, but we expected maybe a little bit more of a crowd based on the numbers that they gave us. Um, that was a sold out crowd on Saturday, and it was against, a Georgia State football team. And you see that the reason that happened is because they're 3-0 Vanderbilt football, and they just went on the road and beat two teams that are historically great programs and they weren't supposed to beat. Like, put
Mm.
that out plain and simple. And fans see that and they start to show up, and then fans come back and they see Vanderbilt's offense put up 70 points for the first time in 107 years, and they're going to keep coming back. And Utah State is obviously important. It's home game, and they're going to keep pulling them in. But that's another aspect to this situation. And Clark talked about it, a little bit on last Thursday, just how special it is for him, um, to be, giving this kind of program and giving this output every Saturday for students and for fans. And he wants this to become. He wants, Vanderbilt football to become like the activity on Saturday nights. I think maybe he said that in the post game presser
Mm.
as well. But he's seeing this transformation through the fan base and the engagement. And Nashville is Nashville, and he sees this kind of potential to have Vanderbilt stands packed at every single game and a massive fan base, kind of like, your Tennessees of the world. And it's obviously a little bit different because the college towns, which with huge, crazy college fan bases, maybe do a little bit better than like the big cities like Nashville do. But there is so much potential for growth here within the fan base, um, within the city. You think about it, you grow up in Nashville. Are you gonna root for Vanderbilt sports in years past? Like if I, was growing up 10 years ago, there's no way I would be rooting for Vanderbilt college sports. I would root for either
Mm.
wherever my parents went. I would pick another random college, but there's no way in heck I'm rooting for Vanderbilt because they're not good at anything. Like this was the mentality 10 years ago. And now if I'm a student who, or not a student, if I'm a kid growing up in the Nashville area and I'm a Nashville family and I don't have some, really tied down allegiance to another college that maybe a parent went to, like I'm probably becoming a Vanderbilt sports fan. And like that right there is your kind of encapsulation of everything that's happened inside of this program. And it's a reflection on Vanderbilt football, but it's also a reflection on the rest of athletics and the rest of the school. Because Vanderbilt baseball has always been great, and you see movement through baseball and basketball and soccer and all the other sports, but football is college sports. And as the football program goes, the athletics program goes, and that's a pretty much a blanket statement everywhere. And you see the kind of passion that a lot of fans in the Nashville area have towards Vanderbilt baseball, and you're seeing it now towards football as well. And you're seeing, again, not to go back to this idea of these building blocks for the future, but
Mhm.
I think the fans and the engagement from the Nashville community is something that has exponentially gotten better over the last year, and I think it's going to continue to trend that way as long as Vanderbilt keeps winning.
For sure. Dylan, I think an interesting point about what Clark said. Basically said that he's kind of trying to channel the Nashville environment into First Bank Stadium, where he wants the night to start at First Bank Stadium and then it can end wherever you would like it to end. Wherever Dylan Tovitz ends his Saturday nights, he can end his Saturday night. But people like you have got to start it at First Bank Stadium, and a lot of Vanderbilt students have not over the years, as you know. And I think that the tide's starting to turn there a little bit, right? Where you're starting to see like the student section's packed every week, even if they're not sold out. And I would venture to guess they'll sell out every game this year. I think the big test moving forward is what does it look like when Mizzou comes in, or Auburn comes in, or LSU comes in? How drastic is the difference in that game? And LSU tickets are dang near $200, so there's clearly some interest from the Nashville community to get there right now. I think that's a big deal too. Also, want to mention what Diego Pavia said. I thought honestly a pretty profound response to what I asked him about the revenge game against Georgia State. Talked about how he wants every kid to come and have a good impression of him. He didn't come from a lot, and um, basically that's why he wants to perform every game. And I think Dylan, I guess to make that point is to say they're a more likable group, and they have so many personalities that I think people have gravitated towards. You look at Diego Pavia and all that he is, and Eli Stowers, and kind of how he's centered on faith, and a lot of people resonate with that in the community. Look at Corday Sidner standing on podium, and he's cheesing the whole time. I mean, they're a group that I think is really likable, and I think people, even if people don't stay Vanderbilt fans long term, I think people gravitate towards this group in particular just because there are so many likable players on this team, and I don't know that we've talked about that enough. I think they're a really captivating group of guys, even if they don't go and win 10 games. I just think they're a group that people are going to latch on to. And I think when we post articles in 2 years and say this guy just signed with this team, people are actually going to care. And I don't know that that's the case with a lot of current Vanderbilt football alums. People like these guys, and not just because they've won, because I think they represent a lot about what this program is and the good parts of it, but also what it hasn't been. So, Dylan, we've only got a sec left to go. I'll swing it to you before we got to get out of here.
Yeah, it's a good point. The other, no, it's definitely a good point because the other thing is they're having fun out there, and I think that resonates in the fans and in the students as well. Um, you see it with the energy they bring, and to your point, the likable personalities, but it's something that winning helps a lot with, but it's not always, completely hand in hand. Like it doesn't seem like these are players that are going out on the field and just doing their job or just doing this because they have a football skill and, they are getting paid to go out there and play for Vanderbilt football. Like they're doing this and they're loving every second of it. And that not only helps, a better product on the field and helps you win more games, but to your point, it helps with that, engagement from fans and it helps the entire program and it's just a more kind of pleasant thing to be around. You think of you know, the music they play at practice all week, like not I don't want to say making fun, but like kind of making fun of their opponents and like when they break down practice every day, it's everybody's yelling and screaming and maybe they do that normally, but you can tell how much passion these guys have and how much fun they're having throughout this season and even throughout training camp and I think that helps a lot as well to your point. But yeah, definitely, wrapping things up. I guess this turned into, and we wanted it to turn into, but a bit of a State of the Union, which I think is good. I think the overall message from me, and you can piggyback on me a little, but it's things are going as well as they could possibly be going right now for the most part for Vanderbilt football. And again, you're starting to see possible signs of sustainability in the future, but in the meantime, it's important, focus on Utah State and getting to that 5-0 point where you can then discuss heading to Bama, playing LSU. You can discuss the college game days. You can discuss the college football playoff odds. But the vibes, I keep saying vibes, but I think that's the best word for it inside the program are as good as they've been maybe ever. And it's something that, you know, forget being a reporter for a second, but as a Vanderbilt student, it's a pretty great thing. And I think that's something that's resonating with a lot of people right now. And it's good for Vanderbilt football to have put themselves in this position, and we'll see how far they can kind of take it going forward.
Sure. Dylan, it's kind of all we had. I think, again, at the end of this, you got to enjoy it. You got to think about, man, this is a heck of a ride. And I don't know that Vanderbilt football will be on it all that many more times over the years. And they're going to be good, I think, better than they have been in the past. But I mean, this is unbelievable. And I think a lot of people need to caution against taking it for granted. Dylan, nice setup you got there, Dylan.
Yeah, little crowded in the back here today.
I love it. But yeah, man, this is something else. And by now we'd be talking about basketball in a normal year. We'd be
Yeah,
talking about how Vanderbilt had missed some opportunities. And um, by the way, happy first day of college basketball practice. But I'll quit rambling. I think the point should be taken, and even guys like Jake Cutler are buying in now. So I think this is something different than we've experienced in the past. But Dylan, we'll talk later this week. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. We'll talk soon. Peace.